Watching the Hulk curb stomp the X-Men is kind of amazing, to be honest with you guys, as much as I love the X-Men. So, this is the Infernal Hulk comic from Marvel. And what this does is it actually picks up with a vision, right? And it's kind of cool because it says, the age of man is being swept away. This is the age of monsters, of gods, of mutant kind. Step out of the shadows, all of you, and rise. And so what you get is this kind of transformation of a guy into something wholly new. And that's what's kind of bonkers here, because it's basically Glob. Now, that's one of the crazy things to keep in mind here, right? The Hulk is not the Hulk. He's literally possessed by this eldritch demon. But at the moment, they're quite literally transforming Earth and creating an army of monsters. But the thing about Robert Herman is that he's one of these characters that Marvel has where no one's ever really bothered to push him to his limits and see what he can actually do. His body's made of a living wax, which is semi-transparent, hence why you can see his eyes and skeleton and that kind of stuff. There was an Age of X-Man storyline where it showed that he was essentially immune to telepathy, which was pretty impressive considering the fact that Nate Gray in Marvel Comics is an Omega level telepath. He's a telepath of the highest order. This guy is absolutely overpowered. But Robert Herman is very similar to the old school Iceman in Marvel Comics, where you knew he could be powerful if the right writer got their hands on him, but no one's really seemed to do that up to this point in time. But the vision is basically his, and when he wakes up, you have Quentin Quire, one of the most powerful telepaths in Marvel as well, and you find out that both of them have basically experienced this vision, right? That Quentin asks, I just saw something crazy. Did you see something just now? And the response of Glob, no. I didn't see anything, despite the fact that he did, right? The dude is clearly lying. Now, that's one of the crazy things about Herman to understand. His physical mutation is the thing that makes him feel like an outcast. And in a lot of ways, he's really one of the Morlocks. The reason why I bring this up is because we switch over to the American Midwest and we pick up with the Morlocks themselves. Now, something that I want to specify here, for a lot of you guys who are getting into the X-Men for the first time, by way of this story or just curious about what's been happening with them since the end of the Krakoa Age, the reality is that Marvel's just kind of been spinning their wheels, trying to figure out what to do with the X-Men. The general consensus among the Marvel fan base is that the X-Men just kind of seem to be in a holding phase. There's some cool stories going on, specifically with what Jed MacKay's doing in the main X-Men comic, and Gail Simone and Uncanny X-Men. But on the whole, in the aftermath of the end of the Krakoa Age, pretty much the entirety of the mutant population scattered. And in some ways, things went back to the status quo, and in some ways they didn't. For example, Cyclops' team is out there in Alaska. The Morlocks are just kind of in the Midwest, surviving where they can, when they can, but they're not really living in the sewer systems of New York the way that we're traditionally used to when it comes to the Morlocks in Marvel. At least they're not all consolidated down there. But the Morlocks themselves historically have just basically been mutants that once their powers manifested, they develop physical mutations. And so for that very reason, they simply just cannot walk around out there in the world. People will immediately know they're mutants and they'll attack them, right? That kind of thing. So literally fearing for their lives. And so one of these guys, Holmes, ends up coming back with 50 pounds of tacos. Which is kind of amazing when you think about it, but this is what the Morlocks usually do. They send one of their own that can pass for a human out there into the world to grab food, resources, or help if some kind of situation's going on, like the Mutant Massacre, right? The first real major crossover of the X-Men line within Marvel Comics, and that's what's going on here, right? And it's kind of funny because he says, somebody come with me next time, right? This is just simply too much to carry by myself. And he's told, none of the rest of us can pass for sapiens, man. Do you think they're going to sell tacos to Leech? Which, by the way, Leech is incredibly important to this comic. And honestly, I would argue he's probably the most powerful mutant in Marvel right now. And I'll explain why here in a minute. But of course, another guy says, well, Pyro can pass for a sapien, and it's they might recognize Pyro, which is true, right? Pyro originally made his bones in Marvel as part of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Eventually they became Freedom Force when they were basically working for the government in exchange for pardons based on their past misdeeds. But the fact is, he's a major criminal within the Marvel Universe. So if Pyro just goes walking into a taco joint, right, and it's hey, can I get 50 pounds of tacos? Number one, that's probably gonna flag a few questions, why does one guy need that many tacos? And number two, they're probably gonna recognize him. Not only that, they're just kind of can you imagine Pyro volunteering for a grocery run? Right? But again, that's where the statement's made. I'm just saying, if you guys are going to order 50 pounds of burritos, which apparently that's what it is now, but the problem is that in the middle of all of this, there's this huge pound, right? Literally boom, and it catches everybody's attention. And somebody asked the question, right? Could somebody have made you at the taco joint? And Holmes is just kind of like, no way, right? Like, the guy barely looked at me. It's probably some junkie or something like that. And that's where Hulk shows up here. Now, he's not fighting the X-Men yet, but that's where Hulk shows up here because he's on a mission, hunting for something in particular. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is because someone's always after the Morlocks for whatever reason, right? It's just kind of the nature of their lot in life. And so that leads to everybody bailing. And they try to get Leech out of there as fast as they can because Leech doesn't really have any traditional offensive powers, which is to say he doesn't shoot optic blasts or doesn't have like super strength or anything along those lines. Instead, he's purely a defensive character, but there's seemingly limits here because one of the things that goes on is that Infernal Hulk approaches Leech and says, beautiful little Leech, the power dampener, I've been looking for you. Now, this will undoubtedly lead to a debate online about the nature of Leech's powers, which is to say, one of the things that people are going to ask is that if Leech has the ability to dampen powers, why doesn't he shut down the powers of Infernal Hulk, which is technically true, right? Leech can actually shut down the powers of reality warpers. We saw that when he essentially shut down the powers of Absalom Mercator in the aftermath of House of M. This was a guy who had the ability to restructure the very fundamental forces of matter itself. But Leech's powers work by impacting the brain and basically cutting off a person's abilities to access their powers. So it doesn't take away those powers entirely, but they don't work on individuals who are channeling a power source outside of themselves. And this is the reason why Leech's abilities probably wouldn't work on someone like Doctor Strange or the Scarlet Witch, but it's also why it doesn't work on Infernal Hulk, because the reality is that the Hulk body is possessed by a demon. And the reason why is because the entire basis behind the Eldest, right? This demonic entity that's possessing the Hulk is that it is a being of incredible power, but it's also a magical being. It's not drawing on a mutant gene. And so the result of that is Leech's powers don't work, which is actually kind of a genius strategy for Infernal Hulk to show up here directly. Now, whether this will change over time, I don't entirely know. Mutant powers are currently in a state of fluctuation, and you'll see what I mean once we get to the X-Men. But in that moment, a few Morlocks show up here. You've got Pyro, you've got Erg, and you've got Marrow, and they're doing what they can to try to protect Leech and face off against Infernal Hulk and drive him out. Now, Pyro's powers are exactly what they sound like, a guy who manipulates fire. Marrow has the ability to basically grow bones and then like use them as projectiles, throw them, that kind of thing, like daggers or knives or hatchets or whatever. Erg is really cool. So Erg is a mutant that has the ability to absorb any and all energy and then project that energy out through an energy blast from his eye. You guys have seen him in X-Men the animated series, even if you didn't know who he was, and you'll probably see him in X-Men 97. I don't remember if he showed up in season 1, but the fact is, this guy was always one of my favorite underdogs in the X-Men comics. But the bigger point is that none of them stand a chance because the Morlocks aim to kill Infernal Hulk. And his response is like, kill me? Are you serious? Right? I bore witness when your wretched forebears wriggled out of the sea. Those, such as you, who respect power, should know when they have none. And he literally crushes every single one of these guys. And in fact, he destroys Marrow, just rips this girl in half and tosses her to the side. And so Leech, in the middle of all this chaos, took off running as best he could, and he's just hiding the whole time. And so that's where Infernal Hulk tells him, come out, right? Do not be afraid, cunning little thing. There is work to be done. And finally grabs Leech and walks away. Now, we don't find out what he immediately does with him. Instead, we switch over to the X-Men in Alaska. Now, one of the things to know is the reason why the X-Men are here, at least Cyclops' team, it was kind of vengeance to a degree, right? One of the things you guys probably are aware of is that during the Krakoa Age, a lot of humans were going after the X-Men in a variety of ways, governments and Orcus and so on and so forth. This place in Alaska was actually a Sentinel manufacturing base, and the X-Men are operating out of here as kind of a reminder to the people in this city, you tried to destroy us, right? So we will stay here, we will operate here, and this Sentinel will stay here as a reminder of your hubris, and it'll remind you of how you tried to wipe out, or at least assist in wiping out, an entire race. So it's basically holding their past decisions over their heads and making sure they never forget. But Cyclops Cyclops, bringing the rest of the team together, right, says, "Apologies for the short notice, everyone. Last night, all our personnel here in the Alaska base had a vision at about the same time. I assume the rest of you did as well." Now, it is important to specify, not all the X-Men operate in Alaska, and that's why you're seeing projections of other members of the X-Men here, right? And it's kind of cool because it shows that the X-Men are for the most part aware of what's been happening in the Immortal Hulk comic, which is to say, Cyclops tells everybody they were visions of revolution, of violent grandeur in a world ruled by us. Beast is getting reports of mutants across the globe having dreams like his. And Beast says, if I might interject, Cyclops, the dreams themselves are not the most worrisome part, in my view. This new Hulk seems to be exerting some kind of control over a sizable portion of the mutant population. And he says, I'm sure many of you have felt an instinctual pull towards a specific geographical area. I feel it myself even now. Hulk's fortress in the Appalachian Mountains, Golgothia, the living city. The Hulk considers himself the father of horrors, the ruler of all evolutionary deviations. I do not yet understand how or why, but as distasteful as the notion is, it appears to be true. He is calling us to him. Our illustrious telepaths have been invaluable in managing the crisis. Emma is using her talents to dampen Hulk's persuasive effect worldwide, while young Mr. Quire here shields our team in Alaska. We should be safe from further telepathic attacks, and any physical intrusion will be detected immediately. Now, here's an important thing that I want to point out here, and that's what's so interesting about this. So, a lot of you guys probably heard of a story called Avengers versus X-Men versus Eternals. It was a Judgment Day storyline. It was great. But one of the things that I wasn't really the biggest fan of with it is that it was trying to create this argument that mutants were excess deviation, right? Which is to say, they were really just an offshoot of deviance within Marvel. That kind of flew in the face of decades of history, which is that mutants have an X gene, and they had that X gene because in the early days of humanity, the Celestials experimented on the human race, and they deposited the X gene, and it would just manifest at some point in time. There was no definitive countdown. The gene would just activate for whatever reason. And as humans began to proliferate around the world, right, the human population growing in size, the X gene started passing from one generation to the next. Not every time, but sometimes. And that's how you end up with more and more mutants across the world. That was the status quo. But what Marvel kind of seems to be doing here by bringing in things like evolutionary deviations is they kind of seem to be trying to bring back the idea of mutants in some capacity being tied into deviance. For the most part, I'm not aware that that established status quo from Avengers, X-Men, and Eternals has continued on. Marvel seemed to undo it, but that was my understanding of the nature of the ending of the event. But one of the other things that I want to point out here is that this Beast that you see here is not actually Hank McCoy. It's not the real Beast. And this is an important distinction to understand, again, if you're looking to get into the X-Men. There was a point during the Krakoa era where you had the X-Force comic, and Beast just started to become more militaristic in response to humanity constantly trying to destroy the mutant population. The result was that he basically became an extremist. And so the original Hank McCoy basically cloned himself and then ultimately ends up sacrificing himself later on, but backed his mind up into a computer system. I won't go beyond that because that kind of spoils what's happening right now in Jed McKay's X-Men run in case you want to read it. But the point is that this is basically just a clone of Beast. That what the X-Men had done is they had taken one of the old backups of Beast from like way back in the day, and they had deposited it into this clone. And so the Beast that you see here is effectively a mental backup, so to speak, of Hank McCoy before he went crazy and became a villain, an extremist, right? So that's why he operates that way. The real Hank McCoy is back, right? So you've technically got two Hanks running around, two Beasts running around in Marvel Comics. But with all that being said, there is a question raised by Glob, right? He asks, I know that I'm just kind of an extra in this whole meeting, but I've got a question. Why us, right? We're not like him. Mutants aren't monsters, right? And the response of Beast is no. Mr. Herman, we are most certainly not like this Infernal Hulk, and I promise you, we will protect our own from him. And so the fact that Philip Kennedy Johnson doesn't really give us a definitive answer, with Beast saying, well, I mean, if you remember, there was the whole event with Eternals, right? That basically seems to indicate Marvel might go one of both ways, or something wholly new with the origin of mutants within Marvel, right? I have no real clue what direction they're going to choose here. But the other funny thing is that Jubilee and Wolverine end up going out to get some chicken, and Jubilee asks him, what do you think of the visions, right? What did you see? And Wolverine doesn't really tell her about anything he saw, right? It just doesn't really mean anything. But then when he talks to her about the visions, he says the same thing. Because one of the things to know, as you guys have probably figured out when it comes to Wolverine, the guy's been around for so long, he's used to this kind of thing happening. Some force out there attacking the mutant population, trying to whisk them in as a part of their, campaign or cult or what have you. More so than that, this is very reminiscent of what Apocalypse would do back in the day, gathering forces to his side with the promise of a greater life, right? Things becoming better for the mutant population. Wolverine's seen it a million times. It's also incredibly possible here, he saw something that struck a personal chord with him, and with him being the kind of guy who's just like, I don't like talking about my feelings, right? He just doesn't really come out with that kind of information. But the point is that while Wolverine and Jubilee are out, and Cyclops' team within Alaska just kind of trying to figure out what's going on here, Infernal Hulk shows up, but he doesn't immediately attack. Instead, he sends Leech out there. Not only that, right, you got Quentin Quire and you got Glob and you got folks hanging around, and the question's asked here, right? Has anybody considered what would happen if the Hulk wins? Because for those of you guys who haven't been following the story, keep in mind, Infernal Hulk just basically defeated Iron Man and all the weapons that Iron Man had at his disposal. No one's been able to defeat this guy up until this point in time. The X-Men are just the next stage in the campaign that he's engaged in. It's very reminiscent to World War Hulk in a lot of ways. And so that's where Glob's like, I mean, if the Hulk wins, then we'll all probably be dead by then, to be honest with you. But then the question is asked about what Glob saw. And Quentin chimes in, right? And it's like, well, Glob said he didn't really have a dream. And it's like, well, wait, I thought we all had one, right? I thought we all had some kind of a dream. And what ends up happening is that in the conversation with Quentin, he says, I love Glob, Starkey, because that's the other person Quentin's talking to. But if Hulk's looking for his quote unquote four horsemen, he'd come for Magic or Frost or me. What kind of delusions of grandeur would Hulk have shown to Glob? But something to keep in mind here, right? Warren Worthington, right? While the guy is capable and he is interesting, at the end of the day, his only real power was that he had wings and he could fly. Now, he was still incredibly capable despite that, but once he became a horseman of Apocalypse, and then his wings were removed and replaced with metal wings, now the guy was firing projectiles. He became like one of the deadliest foes that the X-Men had ever faced. His ruthlessness, the whole 9 yards. That's what you're dealing with here. So again, the elevation of Glob is what it looks like we're getting here, which thank God for it, because in the middle of that, Hulk shows up and just starts attacking the entirety of the X-Men. Now, the funny thing is Magneto, who's the one that's leading the X-Men now in the absence of Xavier, he just says, your DX treatment was well-timed, Beast. And for those of you guys who don't know what that is, because of the fact that Magneto had consistently been de-aged and all that kind of stuff, his body was basically degrading. And so Beast ended up creating DX as a way to not only ensure that Magneto could stay alive, but it's also a treatment that amplifies powers. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that the X-Men's powers are in a state of flux. They're more powerful now than they traditionally are. And the DX treatments are responsible for that. And the crazy thing about this is that Cyclops calls out, right, Quentin, status report on the telepathic net. And Quentin just says, nothing's tripped the net. Right, I don't really feel anything. But then he looks over and he sees Leech. And he's like, oh my God, Leech is a power dampener, right? And that's when he says, Cyclops, I think my psi shield is down, right? Like nothing tripped the net because there's no net to trip. I don't have telepathy right now. It's a genius strategy by Infernal Hulk. It's a genius strategy, right? To send Leech in there and to shut down the powers of all the mutants in his vicinity. So now there's no protection there. And so that's where Cyclops says, get Leech away from Quentin as fast as humanly possible. We need that psi shield back. This guy's clearly screwing with our heads. And so at that point, Infernal Hulk appears here and he says, be thankful none of you need die. I've only come for one of you, alive. And Beast's response, right? Of all the wrong houses that you might have chosen, sir, ours was the very wrongest. And Cyclops just says, right, I will say this once, get gone or get disintegrated. But in that moment, Magneto doesn't care. This is an assault on the X-Men directly, and on really the handful of mutants left that can offer some measure of order and structure to a chaotic world. And he says, "This brutish creature means to harm us, and I will not suffer his trespass," and immediately activates the Sentinel and sends it after him. And at that point, Hulk, just looking on, says, "Bridger, do what I brought you to do." Now, Bridger is a guy named David Bridger, and for the most part, he's not overly significant to the story. He's just a former soldier who was one of the first people in the Appalachian Mountains to be turned by Infernal Hulk into one of these crazy, grotesque creatures. And it's kind of a funny thing to have Magneto sending a Sentinel after Hulk. Now, Sentinels are incredibly advanced. They're designed to face off against forces like this, but you're not talking about a regular Hulk. You're talking about a demonically enhanced Hulk, who literally just survived basically a nuclear explosion, right, in the last issue that we covered. I promise, a Sentinel is not going to do anything to defeat this guy. And that's what he says, right? Children's toys. If you are the mightiest of mutant kind, I thought too much of you. Right? You are nowhere near as dangerous as people made you out to be. And Magneto just says, on the contrary, you underestimated us in coming here. The strength of mutant kind is in our fellowship. And you have Cyclops' whole team that attacks Infernal Hulk directly. Now, this is actually a lot more interesting than people might think it is, because on the whole, the X-Men are usually the most powerful beings within Marvel. I mean, there'll be no arguing that, right? The X-Men, pound for pound, when you talk about the full spectrum of powers, dwarf the abilities, by and large, of pretty much everyone who makes up the Avengers, shy for maybe Scarlet Witch, and definitely if she has the life force. But mutants are wildly overpowered. What usually makes the circumstance intriguing is whatever the roster of X-Men happen to be at that point in time. You have magic here, you've got Psylocke, you've got Cyclops, and you have Magneto. These four would normally be more than enough to take all comers, but at the end of the day, it's a demonically enhanced Hulk, and this guy will not fall. And in the face of all of this, Magneto's like, I have felled greater than you. And the response of Infernal Hulk, no one is greater than me. And in one fell swoop, just wipes all these X-Men in a single move, right? And then at that point, looking at Magic, because her soul sword is stabbed right through him, and he just says, this blade is bound to your life force, right? What would happen then if I took your head with it? But in that moment, they're spared by Leech, not because Leech is there to save them, but because Leech shows up here and says, it's done, Hulk. Bridger's work is done here. And the Hulk just says, no, this is not done. I have what I came for, but you will see me again, and soon. The mutants of Earth are mine by right, as you will learn. But one of the small things to notice here, he took the Sword of Magic. Seemingly he took it with him, right? Which is within his ability to do, given his power over magic. And that's one of the things that makes all this so cool, right? It's one of the things that makes it so dope. And so the question of Cyclops, right? I have what I came for. What did he mean by that? And then Quentin is just like, oh my God, because with Leech and Infernal Hulk gone, his telepathy's back, and he realizes Glob's not here. Glob's nowhere to be found. And so at that point, you switch over to the Baxter Building in the aftermath of Infernal Hulk basically dominating the forces of the Avengers. And Reed Richards just says, we're failing, right? And Tony Stark asks, like, how in the world are we failing here? Outside of the fact that literally Tony just got his ass handed to him by Infernal Hulk in the last story. You'd think he'd know not to ask this question. But Reed Richards says, Infernal Hulk is constantly mutating everything around him, his opponents, his servants, his environment. And in fact, it means he has no upper limits that we can observe or quantify. This ancient skull has a gamma signature that is similar, but not similar enough. Any weapon, trap, or gamma leeching device that we build with it will likely not be effective against this new Hulk. In essence, we don't know how to overcome his power source. We don't know how to overcome the demon that's controlling him. And that is where someone walks in and says, you are going about this all wrong, Reed. And Tony's just like, finally, better late than never, because it turns out it's Bruce Banner. And Bruce says, I'm sorry that I've been away. I know everything that's happening is my fault, but you are going about this all wrong. If history has taught us anything, it's that the only way to take down a Hulk is by making a better monster. Now, what this means, We don't know, because keep in mind, the eldest, the demon possessing Hulk right now, they were the one who removed Bruce Banner from the Hulk in the first place, and that's what left the door open for the eldest to dominate and basically possess the Hulk. But the other part of this equation, lest we forget, because we didn't learn about it until like maybe, 4 months ago almost, is that while the eldest is controlling the Hulk, within the mind of the Hulk is still all the other personalities. Worldbreaker Hulk, Savage Hulk, Immortal Hulk, presumably Devil Hulk, right? There's all these different versions in there that are trying to fight for control. So honestly, this could end any number of ways. Who knows what Banner's gonna get turned into, and who knows what the Hulk personalities are gonna end up doing. But with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.